Welcome back to the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Danielle here with Shano sitting in for Tom today, and we are joined now by Professor, esteemed graduate of prestigious, not lesser university, Howard University, Dr. Clarence Lusane. Dr. Lusane, thank you so much for joining us. I cannot wait to hear your response to Scalia's remarks yesterday.
My pleasure. Well, the thing is that Scalia, as I was talking to some of my students, he's basically wanting to vote to be the Donald Trump of the Supreme Court.
Yes.
It is just straight up racial profiling, from his remarks. And it's really disturbing because this case can lay the groundwork for the end of affirmative action. So it really requires a serious reflection on where the country is at in terms of its policies and its protections for people. And for Scalia to voice these kinds of remarks that really come out of another time period, actually out of another century, is really kind of disturbing.
Is there any way to, I've seen a lot of people try and figure out how to claim that those remarks were not racist, or they were not at the very least, and being the most generous I can to Scalia, they were racially biased. How on earth can anybody defend that and not just call it clear-cut racism?
Well, his remarks are straight out of the bell curve. Many of your readers may remember there was a book that came out that was 700 to 800 pages that made a long argument that at the end of it said that people of color are intellectually inferior and that it's genetic, that there's nothing you can do about it. No policy will save it. This was written by Charles Murray, who ended up playing a major role in welfare reform in the country. But it comes out of that kind of thinking. And this is essentially what Scalia is saying, is that it doesn't matter if you put these people in these schools, they simply are not prepared. And, the implication of it is that minimally is culturally, but basically that is genetic. And so that's really kind of a hearkening back to a very, very dangerous kind of notion. But it feeds into, a broader kind of discourses out there. And it's not just coming from, Scalia, it's coming from people like Clarence Thomas as well and others who simply say, the issue of race has been resolved. It was resolved, hundreds of years ago, and we really need to be looking at a country that's completely based on merit.
Yeah, they've been touting, conservatives in general, obviously not Scalia and Thomas, they've been touting this line that affirmative action isn't needed anymore, everything's fine, since 1858. I went back and did the research this morning. 1858 is when they started saying affirmative action isn't needed anymore, everybody should be caught up, and if you're not, it's your problem. Obviously, we have mountains of data that disproves that and shows the reality of the situation is far different, but we can't seem to get away from the rhetoric. How do we move this country in a direction that collectively says it is wrong to perpetuate false ideas like this?
Well, first, I think we just have to be honest and discuss that, there are ongoing issues of racial discrimination and racism in the country. Yesterday, I was at the congressional commemoration for the 150th anniversary of the signing of the 13th Amendment. And the 13th Amendment, of course, was the amendment that abolished slavery. And there were speakers from the Republican side, speakers from the House side, and from the Democratic side, and President Obama spoke. And to President Obama's credit, unlike many of the other speakers, he stated that, yes, that was an important turning point in the country's history, but this struggle continues. And it goes on. And we must continue to fight against bigotry, but not only in terms of race, but also in terms of religion.
Yes.
And so, it's critical that we don't dismiss, because we've had civil rights gains and there have been the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act and other policies, that we overlook the evidence that shows that when it boils down to the facts, the discrimination against people of color, the discrimination against women continues. And the only way you get around that is through public policy that makes every effort it can to end those disparities.
Now, I know what our limitations are as as when it comes to Scalia himself, we can't exactly fire him. Congress could certainly impeach him.
Right.
I think the likelihood of that is slim. But just like the Voting Rights Act, we can press Congress to protect this important legislation. If the Supreme Court goes the way that many think it may, striking down this affirmative action ruling, how do we go about putting that back into place, bringing the voting rights back, helping to fight for policies that will continue the 150-year struggle of trying to create real equality?
Well, it depends a lot on how the Supreme Court will rule. I'm not completely convinced that it actually will strike.
Yeah, I got my fingers crossed.
If it does, it can do it under two approaches. One is a very narrow approach that says the specific policy that the University of Texas has attempted to implement, which is based on the University of Michigan Law School policy that the court had actually held. But even if it says that is problematic and you have to go back to the drawing board, that doesn't completely disarm affirmative action. However, the court takes the position that is unconstitutional, then it really ties the hands of Congress. And it really then means that until there's another Supreme Court ruling, there's not a lot of space. So it really is a very critical moment in terms of, where the Supreme Court is going to come down. And going all the way back to the Bakke case in the 1970s, the court said that under admissions policies, race can be a factor among many. And that more or less has been the policy pretty much up to the day, even with these other cases that have come through. If the court says under no circumstances, which is the goal of many of the conservatives, that race can be a factor, which also implies other conditions as well, then we really have a problem in the country.
Well, hopefully it doesn't come to that point, but if it does, we will have to look to wonderful, intelligent, highly educated folks like yourself for what we do next. Thank you very much, Dr. Lusane.
Sure, thank you.
To watch more clips from our programs, hit the Watch More Videos button over here. And please be sure to hit the handy-dandy subscribe button so you'll always be up to date. Tag, you're it.